But years later, I did find out there was some going on.
One of the most iconic sitcoms that comes to mind is the hit show Three's.
Oh, I could kiss every interview. All right, you guys, knock it off.
What if one of TV's most beloved comedies was built on secrets, power struggles, and quiet heartbreak behind the laughter? Three's Company made millions laugh. But off camera, things were far from funny. From its unexpected beginnings to explosive backstage drama, this is the untold story of how a sitcom broke boundaries, changed TV forever, and nearly fell apart behind the scenes.
I am talking about you.
Me?
You deliberately.
It's one of those shows that seems like it was always there, silly, charming, and just the right amount of cheeky. But Three's Company didn't start out as a sure thing. In fact, it almost didn't happen at all. The story of Three's Company actually begins across the Atlantic in the UK. The show that inspired it was called Man About the House, a British sitcom that aired from 1973 to 1976. Its premise was considered bold for the time: a young man sharing a flat with two single women in London. While that might not seem like much today, in the early 70s it raised a few eyebrows. Still, it gained a loyal following for its light-hearted take on gender roles and domestic life. American producers saw potential in the idea. They believed the setup could work in the US, but it wasn't just a matter of copying and pasting the original. The concept had to be adapted carefully for an American audience, especially during a time when certain social subjects were still considered a bit risky for mainstream TV. ABC, the network that would eventually air Three's Company, wasn't sold right away. The idea of a man living with two women, especially when they weren't related or romantically involved, was seen as controversial. The 1970s were a time of change, but television hadn't fully caught up to the social shifts happening outside of it. Executives were nervous. There were concerns about how conservative viewers might respond. Before anything made it to air, multiple pilot episodes were made and rejected. The first pilot, starring John Ritter, Valerie Curtin, and Suzanne Zenner, didn't hit the mark. Neither did the second. It wasn't until the third version, with Ritter staying on and joined by Joyce DeWitt and Suzanne Summers, that ABC finally gave the green light. Even then, the network only ordered a short first season of 6 episodes, treating it as a trial run. That first season aired in 1977, and the reaction was far better than anyone expected. Audiences loved it. The timing was just right. People were ready for a show that didn't take itself too seriously, but still felt fresh. The country was in the middle of cultural changes, with traditional roles being questioned and new ideas entering the mainstream. Three's Company managed to walk the line between playful humor and subtle commentary without getting too heavy-handed. Hey there! At the center of the show was Jack Tripper, played by John Ritter. Jack was charming but clumsy, funny but never cruel, and he brought a lot of heart to what could have easily been a one-note character. Ritter's physical comedy was one of the standout elements from the very start. He had a way of making even the most ridiculous situations feel grounded in reality. Well, almost. Whether he was tripping over furniture or getting caught in an awkward lie, Ritter's performance gave the show its comedic backbone. The twist in the show's plot, which became one of its most famous features, was that Jack had to pretend to be gay in order to live with 2 women in the same apartment. Their landlord, Mr. Roper, was uncomfortable with the idea of mixed-gender roommates, so Jack's pretend sexuality was the only way to make the living arrangement acceptable. While the concept might seem problematic by today's standards, at the time it was seen as a clever workaround that added a constant layer of tension and misunderstanding. A goldmine for comedy writers. Joining Jack were Janet Wood, the practical and grounded florist played by Joyce DeWitt, and Chrissy Snow, the bubbly blonde secretary played by Suzanne Summers. The chemistry between the 3 actors was undeniable. Each brought something different to the table. Jack was the goofy everyman, Janet was the voice of reason, and Chrissy was the lovable wild card. Together, they created a dynamic that kept viewers coming back week after week. Though the show leaned into slapstick and absurd scenarios, there was something relatable about the trio's friendship. They weren't perfect, but they looked out for each other. They had fights, misunderstandings, and moments of real connection, just like any group of close friends trying to navigate adult life. The humor often came from miscommunication and mistaken identity, a nod to classic farce, but the heart of the show was always about their bond. Behind the scenes, credit for shaping the American version of the show goes to producers Don Nichol, Michael Ross, and Bernard West. They worked hard to tailor the scripts and characters to American tastes while keeping the spirit of the original British version alive. Their efforts paid off. When the first full season launched, it didn't take long for Three's Company to become one of the most talked about comedies on television. The show's structure was simple. Most episodes took place in just a few locations: the apartment, the Roper's flat downstairs, and the local pub. But within those tight spaces, the writers managed to pack in enough chaos, jokes, and twists to keep the pace fast and the laughs consistent. Audiences knew what to expect: a misunderstanding, some light panic, a big reveal, and a happy ending. But the formula worked, especially with Ritter's perfect timing at the center. It's worth noting that Three's Company was part of a broader trend in television during the late 70s. Shows were beginning to explore more adult themes, and sitcoms were taking more creative risks. Norman Lear had already paved the way with socially conscious comedies like All in the Family. But Three's Company chose a different approach. It didn't aim to start a conversation about politics or race. Instead, it let the characters' lives and situations reflect the changing world in subtle, often humorous ways. Despite early hesitation from ABC, the show quickly climbed the ratings. By its second season, it was one of the top shows on TV. The cast became household names. Fan mail poured in, and advertisers were eager to be part of its growing success. Still, it wasn't without controversy. Some critics took issue with the show's sexual innuendos and perceived it as too suggestive for prime time. Others argued that Chrissy's character reinforced outdated stereotypes. But despite those critiques, the audience numbers told a different story. People loved the show. It offered 30 minutes of escape, laughter, and a bit of cheeky fun, a welcome break from everyday life. As the seasons rolled on, Three's Company would go through changes both on-screen and off. But in these early days, there was a genuine sense of something special taking shape. A show that almost didn't happen became one of the biggest hits of its time. All because a few producers believed an idea from across the pond could be reimagined in a way that made people laugh and maybe think a little too. From the moment Three's Company hit its stride, viewers connected with it. It wasn't just the farcical plots or the slapstick humor. It was the feeling that these characters belonged together. Jack, Chrissy, and Janet weren't just roommates. They felt like friends we all wanted to hang out with, and each of them brought something different to the table. At the center of the show was John Ritter as Jack Tripper. Ritter wasn't just funny. He had a natural instinct for physical comedy that made even the most outrageous scenarios feel believable. His timing was precise. He could trip over a couch, get caught in a lie, or hide behind a door with the kind of exaggerated grace that only great comedic actors possess. But he also had a soft charm that grounded the character. That was never mean or manipulative. He was just trying to get through life, like most of us. Ritter's performance was so central to the show that it often carried entire scenes. He had a way of making ridiculous situations seem logical, at least in the world of Three's Company. Whether it was hiding in the shower to avoid being caught in a lie, or pretending to be someone he wasn't, his commitment made it work. And audiences responded to that energy. It's not easy to find someone who can be silly, smart, and sympathetic all at once. But Ritter made it look effortless. Then there was Suzanne Summers as Chrissy Snow. On the surface, Chrissy was the classic blonde stereotype, naive, bubbly, and often confused. But Summers brought much more to the role. Her comic timing was sharp, and she delivered her lines with a kind of innocence that made the character impossible to dislike. Chrissy was never cruel, never sarcastic. Her heart was always in the right place, even when her head wasn't quite following, and that's part of what made her so memorable. Critics at the time were divided on the character. Some accused the show of leaning too heavily on stereotypes, particularly with Chrissy's personality. Feminists pointed out that Chrissy's ditzy persona could reinforce outdated ideas about women. But many viewers saw something different. They saw a character who, while occasionally silly, was also kind, sweet, and good-natured. She wasn't a caricature meant to be laughed at, she was someone the audience rooted for. Joyce DeWitt's Janet Wood was the perfect counterbalance. Where Jack was wild and Chrissy was whimsical, Janet was sensible, smart, and often the voice of reason. She wasn't just the straight man in the comedy trio, she had her own sense of humor and strength. DeWitt played Janet with a natural ease, never overplaying her lines but always delivering them with authenticity. She made Janet feel real. Together, the three actors formed a perfect comedic triangle. Each played off the others in ways that felt organic. When they were on screen together, the rhythm clicked. It wasn't forced. It felt like they were genuinely having fun, which, for the most part, they were. The rapport between Ritter, Summers, and DeWitt became one of the most praised aspects of the show. You could sense the mutual trust and timing that only comes from people who understand each other well. Beyond the performances, the show's writing played a key role in its success. The scripts were filled with misunderstandings, mistaken identities, and double meanings. All classic farce material, but they were delivered in a way that felt fresh for the time. A lot of the comedy revolved around Jack pretending to be gay to appease the landlord, a plot point that created endless opportunities for comic confusion. And while that concept might raise eyebrows today, back then it was seen as progressive, even daring. The show's creators didn't use Jack's pretend sexuality as a punchline. Instead, it was used as a device to highlight society's discomfort with changing norms. The show wasn't trying to make a political statement, but it did reflect the culture of the 70s, where conversations about relationships, gender roles, and identity were becoming more open. By couching those themes in comedy, Three's Company reached a wide audience without preaching or taking sides. The setting also helped. Most of the action happened in just a few locations, mainly the apartment the trio shared and the Roper's flat downstairs. This limited setting created a sense of intimacy. Viewers felt like they knew the place. It wasn't glamorous, but it was familiar. It gave the show a stage-like quality which suited its farcical tone. Every episode felt like a mini play, complete with entrances, exits, and well-timed punchlines. Recurring characters also added to the appeal. The Ropers especially became fan favorites. Norman Fell as Stanley Roper and Audra Linley as his long-suffering wife, Helen, brought their own style of humor to the mix. Stanley's cluelessness and outdated views made him both frustrating and hilarious, while Helen's eye-rolling sarcasm and sexual frustration added an unexpected layer to their marriage. Used imagination, I expect. Norman felt a layer to their marriage. Their dynamic added depth to the world of the show, showing a different kind of relationship that contrasted with the youthful energy upstairs. The show's style, what many call farce, wasn't new, but it hadn't been used this effectively on American television in a while. It borrowed heavily from classic slapstick and stage comedy, similar to what made I Love Lucy so popular decades earlier. But Three's Company updated that formula with a more modern setting, looser boundaries, and a little more silly, yes, but also smart in how it played with expectation. For all its laughs, the show also managed to reflect the shifting values of its era. The idea of three single adults living together without being romantically involved was still unusual in 1977. The show didn't dwell on it or turn it into a moral question. It simply presented it as normal, and that quiet normalization had a lasting impact. It showed that not every relationship needed to be romantic, and not every woman on TV had to be a wife or girlfriend. The success of Three's Company wasn't immediate, but it grew steadily. By its second and third seasons, the show was one of the most watched programs on American television. It appealed to a broad audience. Young people loved the humor. Older viewers appreciated the simplicity, and families tuned in for the fun. It became a staple of weeknight viewing, the kind of show you could rely on to lift your mood. Its impact went beyond just ratings. The characters became cultural references. Jack Tripper became a model for the goofy yet lovable male lead. Chrissy's name became shorthand for a certain kind of character, and Janet's balance of logic and warmth influenced future female roles in sitcoms. The show's mix of farce and heart shaped many comedies that came after it, from Friends to Will and Grace. What made Three's Company truly shine was how it combined all these elements without ever seeming to try too hard. It wasn't flashy. It wasn't built around a big concept or moral lesson. It was just three people in an apartment trying to figure out life, relationships, and how to keep their landlord from losing his mind. It made you laugh, sure, but it also made you feel like you were part of their little world, and that was something special. The magic didn't last forever, of course. Cast changes and behind-the-scenes drama would eventually shift the tone of the show, but during its peak, Three's Company wasn't just successful, it was iconic. It offered a kind of laughter that felt effortless and genuine, at a time when audiences were ready to laugh at something a little different. At the center of the most talked about behind-the-scenes drama was Suzanne Summers, who played Chrissy Snow. Her rise to fame was meteoric. Chrissy quickly became one of the show's standout characters, and Summers, with her infectious energy and comedic timing, was at the height of her popularity. By the fourth season, she was a household name, appearing on magazine covers and late-night talk shows. But that fame came with a growing sense that she deserved more recognition, not just in the form of applause, but in terms of compensation. As the show continued to grow in popularity, so did the disparity in pay between cast members. Summers was reportedly earning around $30,000, 0 cents, per episode, while John Ritter, who played Jack Tripper, was making closer to $150,000, 0 cents. Summers, supported by her husband and manager, Alan Hamill, began pushing for a pay increase. She wanted her salary to match Ritter's and also requested a percentage of the show's profits, an unheard-of ask for a female sitcom star at the time. Her demand sparked immediate tension with the network and producers. ABC, already cautious about setting a precedent for contract negotiations led by actors, especially women, refused. Negotiations quickly turned into a standoff. What followed was a series of strained interactions, miscommunications, and hardline decisions that changed the show forever. Instead of reaching a compromise, the producers began isolating Summers on set. Rather than filming full scenes with the rest of the cast, her role was reduced to short, disconnected appearances. She would often appear in phone call scenes, shot separately, which were edited into the episodes. It was a clear attempt to sideline her while avoiding a sudden on-screen exit that could confuse fans. But the tension was obvious to those who knew the show well. Eventually, it became impossible to keep up the illusion. By the end of season 5, Summers was officially let go. The reaction from fans was immediate and mixed. Some supported her decision to stand up for what she believed was fair treatment. Others felt betrayed by the sudden loss of a beloved character. The media, for its part, was relentless, with headlines painting Summers as either a brave pioneer or a greedy diva, depending on the angle. The departure of Chrissy left a gap that the show scrambled to fill. First came Cindy Snow, Chrissy's cousin, played by Jen Lee Harrison. Cindy was introduced as a similarly bubbly character, but with a more physical slapstick style. Later, Priscilla Barnes joined the cast as Terry Alden, a more grounded and sensible nurse, shifting the show's dynamic once again. Both replacements had their moments and brought their own strengths, but many fans agreed that the original trio's spark was hard to replicate. Meanwhile, the relationships behind the scenes continued to suffer. Suzanne Summers' once close bond with Joyce DeWitt, who played Janet, became strained. The two didn't speak for decades after the fallout. Summers often described feeling abandoned by her co-stars, while DeWitt was reportedly upset by the way the situation had been handled publicly. The tension wasn't limited to personal feelings, it extended into the overall mood on set, where trust and openness had once flourished. Despite the internal issues, the show continued to perform well in the ratings for a while. John Ritter remained the glue that held everything together. His professionalism and dedication to the role kept things moving, even as the cast dynamics shifted. Ritter was respected by everyone involved, and he did his best to stay out of the conflict, focusing instead on maintaining the show's comedic rhythm. Still, the atmosphere on set had changed. What was once a collaborative and light-hearted environment became more controlled and guarded. Producers, particularly Don Nichol, Michael Ross, and Bernie West, maintained tight control over the creative direction, rarely welcoming input from the actors. Joyce DeWitt later spoke openly about this, noting that the cast had very little say in how their characters developed or how stories were told. This lack of agency became increasingly frustrating for some. The introduction of new characters helped to keep the show afloat, but it couldn't recreate the original chemistry. Cindy's slapstick didn't resonate with all viewers, and while Terry brought a fresh energy, the transition between lineups felt abrupt. It was like trying to replace a key ingredient in a recipe and hoping the result would still taste the same. Some fans stuck with it, but others drifted away, feeling that the magic was gone. Behind the scenes, the industry was also watching closely. Suzanne Summers' contract dispute became a cautionary tale for actors and studios alike. For years, her name was associated with controversy rather than success, and she found it difficult to land significant roles in television again. But in time, she rebuilt her public image and eventually became a successful entrepreneur and advocate for women's health. Her story, once seen as a warning, later came to be viewed as a sign of early resistance against gender inequality in the entertainment industry. Joyce DeWitt kept a lower profile after the show. She appeared in theatre productions and occasional television roles, but largely avoided the limelight. Her reflections on her time in Three's Company were often thoughtful and honest. She acknowledged the challenges, but also expressed deep appreciation for the impact the show had on her life and career. Years later, in a surprising moment of reconciliation, Suzanne Summers and Joyce DeWitt reunited for an emotional conversation on Summers' talk show. It was their first time speaking in over 30 years. They discussed their past misunderstandings, the intense pressure of fame, and the different ways they had dealt with the fallout. The reunion was a rare and heartfelt moment of closure, not just for them, but for fans who had followed their story for decades. As for the rest of the cast, the aftermath of the show brought its own mix of ups and downs. Priscilla Barnes, who had joined in the later seasons, later expressed mixed feelings about her time on Three's Company, particularly the lack of creative input and the lingering tension on set. Still, she formed lasting friendships with some of her co-stars and maintained a steady career in television and film. Through it all, John Ritter remained a constant. He carried the weight of the changing cast and behind-the-scenes drama with professionalism and humor. His performance never faltered, and he continued to earn praise for his ability to make audiences laugh, even as the show evolved. Ritter's role on Three's Company became the foundation for the rest of his career, which would later include more critically acclaimed performances, including his role in 8 Simple Rules. The third act of Three's Company wasn't just about the drama within the show's storylines. It was about the real-life challenges of working in television during a time when actors, especially women, had little leverage. Suzanne Summers' exit marked a turning point. It wasn't just about one actress leaving a show. It was about the larger issue of fairness in the entertainment industry. The fallout changed not only the direction of Three's Company, but also how future negotiations in Hollywood would be handled. By the time the dust had settled, Three's Company was no longer the same show. It was still funny, still charming in many ways, but the heart of what made it special had been shaken. And while the laughter continued, it now carried the weight of what had been lost behind the scenes. By the 7th season, the show was beginning to show signs of fatigue. The core concept, Jack pretending to be gay so he could live with 2 female roommates had been stretched as far as it could go. The writers had explored every angle of mistaken identity, romantic mix-ups, and landlord misunderstandings. What once felt fresh and unpredictable now began to feel familiar and formulaic. The departure of Suzanne Summers in 1981 had already disrupted the balance of the show. Her replacements, first Cindy and then Terry, had tried to bring new energy, and in some ways they succeeded. But for many fans, the original trio of Jack, Janet, and Chrissy had been the heart of the series. Without that dynamic, something always felt a little bit off. Even though the cast worked hard and new characters had their moments, the show struggled to recapture its early magic. Outside the walls of the apartment, the television landscape was also changing. The early 1980s brought a new wave of shows with faster pacing, more action, and different styles of storytelling. Shows like The A-Team, which debuted in 1983, offered high-octane plots and dramatic cliffhangers. Sitcoms were also evolving, with some leaning into more serious, issue-based comedy, while others embraced a slicker, more modern tone. In that environment, Three's Company began to feel like a holdover from an earlier era. The show tried to adapt. Writers introduced new storylines, new characters, and even hinted at romantic developments between the original leads, but many of these attempts felt forced. The core appeal of Three's Company had always been its simplicity. A few characters, one apartment, and a whole lot of misunderstandings. Trying to expand beyond that formula often led to storylines that didn't quite land. By the time the 8th season aired, it was clear that the end was near. Ratings were still decent, but the energy had shifted. Long-time viewers sensed that the show was winding down. And when the series finale aired on September 18, 1984, it confirmed what many had suspected. Three's Company was coming to a close. The final episode attempted to tie up loose ends. Jack proposed to his girlfriend Vicky, Janet married a character named Philip, and the roommates finally went their separate ways. It was a fast and tidy wrap-up for a show that had built its charm on drawn-out chaos and unexpected detours. Many fans felt that the ending, while respectful, was a bit too rushed. After years of watching these characters navigate daily life, it was jarring to see their stories wrapped up in just one episode. Still, the producers had a plan. They launched a spin-off series called Three's a Crowd, which picked up Jack's story as he moved in with his new girlfriend Vicky and her father. The show attempted to keep some of the humor from Three's Company while introducing a more traditional domestic setup, but the spark was gone. Without Janet, Terry, or the familiar apartment, it felt like a completely different show. Three's a Crowd lasted only 1 season before being quietly cancelled. While Three's Company ended its original run in 1984, its legacy was far from over. Reruns kept the show alive, introducing it to new generations who discovered it through late-night syndication or cable networks. The characters, the theme song, and the farcical plots remained just as entertaining decades later. The show's ability to make people laugh, no matter the era, became one of its most enduring qualities. The cast, too, went on to forge their own paths. John Ritter remained one of the most beloved figures in television comedy. His ability to balance humor with warmth carried him into a successful post-Three's Company career. One of his standout roles came in 8 Simple Rules for Dating My Teenage Daughter, where he once again played a character caught between chaos and compassion. Tragically, Ritter passed away suddenly in 2003 at the age of 54 due to an aortic dissection. His death shocked fans and colleagues alike. He left behind a lasting legacy and a body of work that continues to be celebrated. Suzanne Summers took a very different route. While her departure from Three's Company had been contentious, she went on to build a successful career as a businesswoman and wellness advocate. Her promotion of the Thigh Master became iconic in its own right, and her books on health and aging turned her into a respected figure in the lifestyle industry. Summers also remained a vocal advocate for women's rights in the workplace, often using her own story as an example of the challenges faced by women in Hollywood. She passed away in 2023, just 1 day before her 77th birthday. leaving behind a complex but inspiring legacy. Joyce DeWitt, who played Janet, chose a more low-key path after the show ended. She stepped away from the spotlight for a time, returning to acting mostly in theatre and the occasional television role. Her relationship with Summers remained strained for years after the show, but in 2012, the two reunited on Summers' online talk show for a candid and emotional conversation. It was a moment of healing for both women and for fans who had long wondered about the real story behind the scenes. Priscilla Barnes, who joined the cast in later seasons as Terry Alden, continued to act in television and films, including notable roles in The Devil's Rejects and Jane the Virgin. She spoke openly in later years about the pressure and restrictions she experienced while working on Three's Company, but also expressed gratitude for the experience and the fans who had supported her. The cast members like Richard Klein, who played Jack's friend Larry, also remained active in the entertainment world. Klein appeared in various TV shows and stage productions, always embracing his connection to the original series. Over the years, many of the cast members appeared at fan conventions, tribute shows and interviews, where they shared their stories and reflected on their time with the show. What Three's Company left behind was more than just a collection of funny episodes. It left behind a new model for sitcoms. Its mix of slapstick, innuendo, and character-driven comedy became a blueprint for many shows that followed. Series like Friends and Will and Grace borrowed elements of the mismatched roommates formula, updated for new audiences, but rooted in the same sense of shared space and chaotic friendship. The show also pushed boundaries, subtly and often without trying to be controversial. It showed that three single people could live together without scandal. It introduced a gay character, even if only as a ruse, into mainstream American homes at a time when LGBTQ+ representation was rare. And it challenged traditional ideas of gender, relationships, and identity, even if it did so through the lens of comedy and confusion. Even now, Three's Company continues to be discovered by new viewers. Streaming platforms have made it easy to revisit the series, and its blend of broad humor and gentle heart still resonates. There's something timeless about the misunderstandings, the rushed explanations, and the moments of genuine connection between the characters. It was never about being perfect. It was about being human, awkward, and a little ridiculous, just like real life. The legacy of Three's Company is one of laughter and resilience. It showed how a simple idea, executed with charm and sincerity, could become something much bigger than anyone expected. It reflected its time, but also helped shape what came after. And though the final curtain came down decades ago, the laughter it brought continues to echo. For many fans, Three's Company wasn't just a show. It was a comfort, a memory, a source of joy at the end of a long day. It reminded us that no matter how messy life gets, there's always room for a bit of humor, and that sometimes all you really need is a good laugh with good friends.